Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, gentlemen, this is your main man, Scott McKay, coming at you from X and Y Communications. You're listening to another episode of the big show, the Mountaintop Podcast. You can find me at Scott McKay on Twitter, Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com. And if you haven't joined the Facebook group at Mountaintop Summit, you really should, because that is an ever-increasing group of men who are all like-minded about being the best men we can and having the best women we can possibly get into our lives and living the dream. With me today is a new friend of mine whose title of his new book caught my curiosity immediately. The name of this book is Personality Isn't Permanent. And with all the conversations we have around here about knowing who the hell you are and being authentic and being the very best version of yourself and deserving what you want and all of that, I couldn't wait to get this guy on the show. His name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And Benjamin, welcome, man.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm already having fun being with you, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? A lot of times you read these books that talk about the same old subjects. Yours whacked me upside the head with a 2x4 because you say these crazy things. It may be perfectly sane for all I know. We're going to dive right into it, but it sounded crazy to me. Things like, hey, Enneagram tests, Myers-Briggs, forget about it. All those are basically just mildly better than, say, your daily horoscope. And you've got a whole different mindset on how we arrive at who we are and what we're about. And to give these guys a hint of what we talked about, you believe we have total control over it, if not the responsibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess to start, I would say that there's a fundamental difference between identity and personality. Identity is how you would define yourself, which, anyone on your audience, it obviously matters how a man would define and describe himself. But often we describe ourselves in very limiting ways. Often our identity is based on the past or on the present. We're very definitive in who we are right now versus thinking about who we want to be in the future. Your personality, on the other hand, is just how you consistently show up in life. It's your consistent attitudes and behaviors. But your identity is the thing that drives your personality. So if you're not clear on who you want to be, then your personality is just going to be a byproduct of who you've been yesterday. That's kind of the core assumption of psychology is that for most people, if you want to predict their future behaviors, all you got to do is look at the past. And that's a big problem if you're someone who wants to actually create a great future. You want your desired future self. And there's a lot of really good research on that nowadays. Your future self is the thing that you want to be predicting your current and daily behavior. And so these tests, they can lead you to ultimately overly defining your present identity, which becomes what we call a fixed mindset.
Yeah, that's kind of a black hole in behavioral psychology, isn't it? That, your parents, your childhood, all these archetypal influences, if you will, from the past are going to define who you are, and you're really just along for the ride, when most of us as human beings will feel a lot better saying to ourselves, hey, I think I'd like to have some influence over who the hell I am, what I'm about, what I believe, and how I act. All of these guys listening have heard at one point, hey, if you want to get better with women, just be yourself, and pulled their hair out. Because what if yourself isn't working? I mean, are you stuck with it, or can you actually mold and change who you are? So I love the direction you're going, and perhaps you can start there. I mean, what if be yourself isn't working, Benjamin?
Well, so Adam Grant is a famous psychologist. He wrote a book called Give and Take. He wrote several great books, but he talks about that actually. He's actually had online arguments with Brene Brown about authenticity. And and I like Brene Brown a lot, but from her perspective, authenticity means be true to yourself. From Adam Grant's perspective, which I agree more with, he gave a commencement speech at Utah State where he talked about how when he was a graduate student, he was horrible at public speaking. He was just terrified and he had no skill at it. And he said, rather than being authentic to myself, because to be authentic to himself right then and there, that would have meant he doesn't speak because he didn't want to, but instead he was authentic to the person he wanted to become. And so from his perspective, the conversation of authenticity often limits people or justifies mediocrity. They say, that's just not who I am, or that's not what I want to do, rather than defining who you want to be and going through the growth process. It's a lot easier to just justify, this is who I am, I don't need to do anything. If you tell someone about your goals, it can be a little more scary because there's potential for failure. And so our ego gets in the way.
Yeah, it sounds like you're scared and or lazy if you draw that conclusion about yourself. I mean, I completely concur with you. As a matter of fact, I have talked at length pretty much for my entire tenure as a dating relationship coach over the past 14 years about the main reason I feel like self-help doesn't work for so many people. We value authenticity in this culture. And anytime someone says in their own mind, I don't like the way I am right now, I want something to change, we feel like we're faking it. We feel somehow inauthentic as we're attempting, hopefully successfully so, to establish some new habits. But see, what I want to do, and I want to see what you have to say about this, is I want to empower these guys listening to this show to say, hey, you know what? The authentic version of myself is who I really want to be. If I have to make some changes to get there, and I have to be a little bit intentional about creating those habits that don't necessarily flow naturally right now, it's all in the name of becoming that better version of my authentic self later, if you follow what I'm saying. So in other words, if people say, hey, you know I'd like to be a better public speaker, but I'm just not, man. And as I go out there and I try to, give myself affirmations or fake it till I make it, I'm going to stumble all over these public speaking practice opportunities, and I'm going to look terrible, and people are going to think to themselves, hey, you know what? He's an imposter. There's no way this guy's a public speaker. But you got to go through that in order to become the public speaker you see inside. It's almost like when Michelangelo carved out David, he said David was inside this block of marble and I just had to release him from it. That's kind of how I look at self-help and becoming the kind of person you'd like to be. But yeah, a lot of people disagree, don't they? They just want to stay in the past and say, yeah, so I am, right?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. You actually could have pulled that line from my book as far as your authentic self isn't who you are today. It's the person you would genuinely choose to be if you could. And yeah, there's a lot of great research on all of this, on what you're describing. I would point your listeners to a TED Talk called The Psychology of Your Future Self. But
beautiful.
What it's like 6 minutes long. It's by a Harvard psychologist named Daniel Gilbert. What he has found, he's got a great statement. He says that people are works in progress that mistakenly think that they're finished. Or he says human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. But the key he found is that the problem with most people is that they don't spend very much time imagining their future. Instead, they spend all their time remembering the past. And so the first step would obviously be you have to actually think about who you want to be. And that's something we all get to decide. You don't discover or fall upon that fact. You have to actually just think about it and say, this is who I want to be. You have to then admit it to people, kind of like you were saying before. Like if you start saying that this is what you want and that you want a different future and that you've been doing it one way, but you're ready to go a different way, the moment you start telling people about it, then you'll start to feel compelled to start organizing your behavior to fit your new story.
Yeah. I mean, an example that comes to mind and that I can personally resonate with is, I'm just kind of chunky. I'm overweight. I'm going to be that guy my entire life. There's nothing I can do about it. And this is a guy who just lost 50 pounds telling you this, right? And I was starting to draw the conclusion, hey, you know what? I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Maybe I'm just going to have this belly and kind of not feel as young as I used to, until I finally took ownership over it and said, there are things that are working for other guys that could probably work for me too. And when I changed the direction my mind was spinning in, my body followed. And Meanwhile, out there in the wilderness of society, people are saying, oh, you shouldn't fat shame people. People should feel good about being chunky. Dude, it's going to give you a heart attack. It's going to give you diabetes. It's going to shorten your life. I had a guy on who I interviewed years ago who wrote a book with a very auspicious title called Die Fat or Get Tough. And he had scathing reviews on Amazon. I can't remember the author's name. But people just
fat or get tough.
Fed it to him, because it was written a lot like a drill sergeant would talk to you and didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for your overweight condition. And I freaking loved it. I thought the book was great. I mean, it taught you to take ownership. And I think there were a lot of lies out there about the kind of authentic self you should want to be. If you read Twitter, they're going to tell you if you vote one way, you should be voting differently. And here's why. There are people out there who are telling people to believe things that they don't even believe. It just fits well with their narrative and it, helps their side along. And people who don't have a foundation, people who have been told what to believe their whole life, fall in line. And as we're recording this, we're living in a nation where there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of unrest, and a lot of it is because people haven't sat down and said to themselves, what do I really believe? What can I personally do about it? Am I going to fall in line with the crowd, with the mob? What am I going to do? Who am I going to believe? What can I be? Who can I be? Based on, some birth influences, but also, what do I want to do? What do I want to take responsibility for? What really is within my circle of influence, right? I think a lot of people underestimate what is within their circle of influence, don't they, Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, with what we're dealing with right now, it's a crazy situation. I listened to the book Man's Search for Meaning twice last month by Frankl. Have you read that one?
That particular book has probably come up at least 3 times in the last 10 episodes.
Well, I mean, it's so relevant.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but what's crazy about what Frankl said is that, the moment a person loses hope and purpose for their future, the present becomes meaningless and unbearable. And so, with this situation that we're in right now, if you don't have a future self that's beyond the situation that gives you hope and purpose or happiness, something to look forward to, then of course you're going to get caught up in all the noise.
Yeah.
The only way to make your present bigger is as the saying goes by Dan Sullivan, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, it's like people are en masse expecting to be told what the new normal is going to be, and they're waiting around for it when we're going to decide our own new normal, damn it, for ourselves.
Yeah. No, it was an interesting application, and it really showed me that if you're not actively creating a future, then you're actually not living in the present. You're just distracted in somewhere else. And the only way to actually live presently and intentionally is by actively creating a better future and a bigger future. I mean, you're a crazy cool example. I mean, so how long was the time frame for the 50 pounds?
Probably about 8 months, but frankly, I lost all but 10 of it within about 3 or 4.
So those 3 or 4 months, probably pretty dang grueling for sure, but they were an amazing 3 or 4 months when you really look back on them. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. And I'll say this for the benefit of any guys out there who are curious about this. After 3 days, having radicalized my diet, detoxing from any alcohol in my system, and I've never really been a drunk, but I just gave up the alcohol, and really just going full OMAD and eating only once a day, and of course going keto also, I felt like a new man. I felt like, I dropped 10 pounds probably in the first week, and I felt like I dropped 20 years in the process. I mean, I was looking for projects to do. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was grueling, but it worked so well so quickly that I was all in. And I was like, hey, I'm going to embrace the pain. I'm going to embrace the challenge here, and I'm just going to crush it. A lot of people say that, but it really was how I felt. And of course, guys like Jocko Willink and taking extreme ownership of things, those ideas, those insights really helped. And I just felt like I was pussing out if I gave up. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to man up and get this thing done. And meanwhile, it's since then inspired me to do a lot of other things I had on the back burner, or was thinking, you know what, I don't have time for this. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Even the guy who is a coach needs that encouragement, because I'm human just like the rest of us. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, man. It's really cool. There's a statement that Frankl makes. He says, and I don't know if you've heard this one, in all the 10 episodes where everyone's talking about it, but what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. So I think that's what's cool, is at some point you freely chose that you were going to do this thing. It was a freely chosen task. You're never going to find this. You just choose at some point, this is what I'm going to do. And then you strive and you struggle for it. And that's what actually creates a good past. Not only does having a bigger future make a better present, but it also makes a better past. I mean, over the last, 4 months or whatever you said it was, that's a freaking good thing to look back on. That gives you confidence.
Well, I think what you're saying applies very well, not only at the micro level, if you're going to consider a relatively brief 8-month journey of, fat loss micro, but also on the macro level too. I mean, what is my purpose? What is this big thing I want to get done with my life? And even then, Benjamin, a lot of guys get hung up on, okay, there's this big monolithic thing that is my life purpose, and I sure don't want to mess it up. So because they're not exactly clear on what that is right now, they don't take the first step because, man, what if I get on the wrong path? I'm sort of stuck there. And what I believe is you can have a life purpose, get it done, and move on to the next one. Or have multiple life purposes running at the same time, some of them with a high, lofty, heroic goal, and another couple of them that are maybe even pure fun or all about the adventure. And I'd love to get your take on that, on purpose, because it seems like if you're going to bring up Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, then, purpose goes hand in hand with that. And I'd love to get your take on that, especially given what you said at the outset, which is identity is different than personality. And it seems to me a lot of people are told what their identity is by parents or society or whatever culture they grew up in without any regard for their personality. It's like, hey, we're all going to be sheep here. We're all going to follow this particular way of doing things. And people are thinking, it just doesn't feel like it meshes with the kind of person I am. I'm just not good at this stuff, or I'm not cut out for this stuff. Meanwhile, you're saying personality isn't permanent. So I'd love to hear how you reconcile all of that with purpose.
Yeah. So purpose, Frankl, like literally the quote I just shared with you is that what man needs is the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. So task being the simple word, like I think what you said just barely was the nail on the head. For the past 8 months, your purpose was to lose 50 pounds. Like that's a purpose. It doesn't need to be like this big encompassing thing. What's interesting though is that your identity comes from your goal. So like over the last several months, your identity was based on this goal that you've been working towards. And so your identity comes from your goals, and your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. So, you over the last 4 to 8 months, whatever it's been since you've dropped these 50 pounds, you were building your identity around that goal, and that identity was shaping your behavior. And now over time, you've got this new version of you with this new level of confidence and ability. And so, yeah, who you are right now is different from who you were 8 months ago.
But then again, I didn't completely drop my life purpose, as it were, of being a guy who helps guys get better with women and being the best man they could be.
So you've kept that.
Yeah, there was a tandem purpose there. A larger one and then the smaller one, the macro and the micro, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it seems like this micro one is helping you better fulfill the macro one. So
100%.
You and your higher mission purpose that you've chosen, which is to help men, you becoming healthier and fitter is a means to that end. So it's actually serving your bigger goal. This is just a step in the process to help you better do that.
Yeah, I completely concur. And meanwhile, there are other things I'm doing that seem purposeful to me. I think we talked about me enough in this show already, but you can have other things going on. You don't have to be so engrossed in tunnel vision that there's this one thing you're doing that has to happen or else you're a failure, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, even Elon Musk builds Teslas and flies people into orbit. There are two different things. And if a guy can be the head of the snake on those two macro ventures, I think it challenges all of us, doesn't it? Now, I want to go ahead and focus on the topics of your book and this idea that the tests that we've been taking to measure our personality aren't really as reliable as we've been told they are. And to kind of stoke the fires for this a little bit, my personal Myers-Briggs has gone from ENTP to ENTJ, perhaps even INTJ over the course of my life because I decided I wanted it to be. My decision-making has become a lot crisper over the years. And I've gotten to the point where I really like solitude instead of big, bustling crowds a lot more than I used to. So my first order of business here is to tell you I'm friendly here, and I am also of the persuasion, in line with the title of your book, that personality isn't permanent. But you've obviously spent a lot more time on this, and I want to hear what you have to say. I'm on pins and needles about it.
Dude, you're awesome. I mean, I love your story because first things first, the research is clear. Your personality is going to change over time, whether you're intentional about it or not. But what I've loved about what you just said is that you're a crisper decision maker now. So what's funny about these tests is, first off, you're the one taking the test. So you're the one self-identifying with whatever. You're the one answering the questions. So the output that you get is based on the score that you gave yourself. But you are now saying the output that I got was the output that I chose. And that was the person I wanted to be. So just real quick, like from a psychological perspective, there is no such thing as a personality type. Any test that categorizes people so strictly it's junk science. Like that's not how personality actually works.
Kind of pop psychology, right?
Yeah. Horoscopy. You can, I guess, gain some perspective from it, but you're never going to actually always be accurate to your type. Just as an example, whatever score that you got, whatever Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, in various situations or even multiple times throughout a given day, you're not going to actually be that person. In the morning, you're going to be a little different from how you are in the middle of the day, from how you're going to be at the end of the day, and in different environments and around different people, you're going to be slightly different. And so context actually matters a lot more. But these tests do create tunnel vision. I mean, that's exactly what you said before. You used the word tunnel vision, which was so cool. When you've assumed a label about yourself, whatever that score may be, that label becomes your lens through which you see the world. So Ellen Langer, she's a Harvard psychologist. She's spent a lot of time studying mindfulness, which is basically awareness of yourself in the situation. And when you've assumed a label about yourself, whatever it may be, you become mindless to all the times the label's not true. You can only see what you're looking for. It's kind of like when you buy a new car, you start to see that car all over the place. But what you don't see is you don't see the 500 other cars. So you become mindless to all the times your behavior contradicts the label. But then the major problem with these tests, or just overly adapting your identity. I don't know if you've ever heard of Paul Graham.
I have.
Yeah, Paul Graham's got a great lecture. It's just a great blog post called Keep Your Identity Small. But basically, it's the idea that the more labels you have, the dumber they make you. Because no, they seriously do.
Oh my God.
Well, the reason why, go ahead and tell me your thoughts.
Well, I mean, the first two words that came to mind were identity politics.
That's exactly what he talks about. But think about it in this way. If you're talking about any aspect of your identity, what you do is you try to defend it. It can't be criticized. You can't have a coherent conversation about it. And you seek to justify and defend it and to confirm it.
Here's my theory. Riff on this. The more people agree to be told who they are, the more they'll agree to be told what to do.
That's crazy. Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what happens, right? Is we form this narrative about ourselves and then it shapes our goals.
Well, is it us creating the narrative, or are we letting Twitter, social media, the government, our political party, are we being led like sheep?
I think so. Yeah, our identity narrative comes from so many different things, but yes, it comes from our culture, it comes from the politics, it comes from exactly so many of those things, but it also comes from even just negative experiences in the past. Like if you've had a bad experience, you may then use it to shape your identity, to say like, I can't do this anymore. If you go ask a girl on a date and she says no, you might think, all right, I must be a loser. Like that's an identity narrative concept that came from a former experience, which doesn't have to be true. It's just a meaning you gave. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is a big picture thing where a lot of our narratives definitely come from the media. So yeah, that's why you got to be really aware of your identity narrative, because your identity is ultimately the thing shaping your behavior and over time who you become. And so this is why you need to get really clear on your future self and the person you genuinely want to be. And then you need to start to clear the environment so that you can remove the inputs, the negative media that's triggering you to be the person you formerly were. And ultimately, you've got to create an environment that supports the person you want to become.
I'm curious. Let's play word association. Actually, 2-word association. I'm going to give you a 2-word phrase, and I want you to tell me what it sparks in your imagination. Learned helplessness.
So, yeah, I mean, learned helplessness has a lot of, I have a lot of thoughts. One would be obviously you're in a crappy environment. Like my example is we adopted 3 kids from the foster system. Like they were in an environment where they were trained to be helpless because of just their culture or their environment. Like that's one. But you can also learn to be helpless even if you don't come from such a situation where you have a failure and then you've defined yourself by that one incident. Then you've literally trained yourself to be, helpless. So here's the cool part real quick is just that we all have the ability to reshape the meaning of our experiences. Like when my parents got divorced, I was an 11-year-old kid and my father became a drug addict. So when I was 11, I formed all sorts of meaning like I'm not worthy, I'm not a good kid, like my life sucks. And that led me down a really bad path. At some point or another, though, I had to choose to give my former experiences a different meaning. Rather than me being a loser, and rather than my dad even being a loser, I had to choose a different perspective. And I think a lot of learned helplessness comes from continuing to be defined by the same perspective that you once had, rather than updating your perspective and choosing a different story. So like I'm no longer telling the same story about what happened when I was 11 years old because I now have a much better perspective and I can choose to give it a much better meaning so that I'm not helpless, so that I'm not the victim. And we all have to take responsibility for our past and for our environment, and we should choose to not be defined by it. But people would rather just be helpless, I guess.
Yeah, that victimhood makes you feel helpless.
Exactly.
And some people kind of camp there and think, hey, you know what? This is lazy. There's that word again. And it's fun to hate on other people. But you're letting whoever hurt you live rent free in your head, and you're giving them superpowers over you that they don't deserve to have. And when you take control over the responsibility of putting that in the rearview mirror and living your best life anyway, regardless of the pain that's been inflicted upon you, regardless of the hand you've been dealt, all of a sudden you feel a lot better internally than you ever did feeling like a victim. But that's something that we only learn once we get to that position. It's a lot like the person who, kind of keeps to himself, doesn't volunteer for a whole lot of charities, etc. The first time they ever go volunteer to help someone less fortunate, they realize at the end of that time, at the end of that day, at the end of that session, whatever they're doing, that they got more out of it than the people they were helping. It's just good for the soul, but you don't ever realize that until you're willing to immerse yourself in it, huh?
Yep. Your behavior also shapes your identity. So yeah, that's good stuff.
I'm curious if you've ever seen the movie with Mark Wahlberg called Instant Family.
Yes, I have, man. It's pretty dang good, man. Pretty accurate. Like
it's fun.
We literally adopted 3 kids, very similar situation.
Yeah. And for those guys who are listening who haven't seen the movie, it's about parents who decide they're going to get foster kids in their house and end up adopting them. Not too much of a spoiler there. It's pretty predictable. But it really does shed some light on the issues that tend to come up when you invite someone into your home and being a part of your family and you're hoping for something happy and shiny, and it just isn't going to work out that way until things get dealt with. There's a lot to clean up there.
It's nuts, man. It's nuts. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's awkward for a kid to pretend like you're their parent. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, it's a tough situation, man. It was crazy. Let's just say that. And I learned a lot through that.
Okay. So getting back to the tests. I remember taking at least 2 tests in my younger years that were designed to, quote unquote, help me figure out what I want to do with my life. Like, what vocation is right for you? Benjamin, both of them said, this is not a lie, this is absolutely the truth. Both of the ones I took, maybe it was the same test, just taken twice, said I should be a funeral director. There's not a chance. I mean, I would be the worst funeral director. I mean, I'm the guy who cracks jokes at funerals. Although every funeral director I've ever met was a damn funny dude socially. Which, I don't know. Maybe there was more to this than...
Maybe that's what you should have been then, man. You chose the wrong thing.
But I just don't want to be a funeral director.
You were defined by that test, man.
Right. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to do that for a living. I like what I'm doing. And further, here's something to think about. When I graduated from college, my current vocation didn't even exist. Right?
Exactly.
So I couldn't have studied to be it, although I did a pretty good job preparing for it in terms of my education, but it was unwittingly. It all just kind of came together because I suppose those were things I was interested in learning, and now I get to apply them in the 21st century model, right? But how do you go about figuring out your personality if you don't have tests to guide you along? I mean, we're not just wandering around in the personality wilderness, are we, Benjamin?
Not at all. I mean, mindfulness, meditation, all those big words are just ways of saying learning how to get in touch with yourself and learning how to make decisions. What you said before, you've gotten to be a crisper decision maker. A lot of it has to do with just literally choosing. We've talked a lot about purpose already in this episode, but you have to clarify and choose your future self. That's like step 101. You have to actually think, who do you want to be? And that takes some time to craft, but it doesn't have to be that intense. Like there's some research out of UCLA that talks about how you can't make quality decisions in the present without being clear on where those decisions will take you. So like you have to actually have a future self in mind to make decent decisions in the present and also to develop skills. And so like you actually just have to think about, as you get more experience and education and knowledge, you might change your mind a little bit based on new information, but based on what you know right now, based on what you would genuinely want to choose, if you weren't so worried about failure or what other people think, what would you choose? And what would the circumstances be like? Again, Gilbert, the guy who I referenced earlier, who talks about future self, like, and his TED Talk is super good, by the way. Like, I highly recommend that. Psychology of Your Future Self by Daniel Gilbert. But he says the reason people don't predict their future is because they literally don't imagine it. They spend all their time thinking about the past. And Einstein said a similar thing. He said imagination is more important than knowledge. So, like, you have to think about who you want to be. And then the next step is actually committing to that. Like, and commitment comes from telling people about it, from putting yourself in a situation, like putting yourself in environments.
I guess along the lines of what you said, which basically comes down to if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time, which is an old saying, a very meme-worthy one. I'm wondering where this buffet of options is that I can choose from. Because a lot of times guys are saying, hey, I'd like to become a better man. I'd like to have a new purpose, but I got nothing. I tell them sometimes to go Wikipedia surfing until they find something interesting, click and click and click till you find something cool. Go on YouTube and say, hey, I'd like to do this. Even if you're one of those unfortunate souls who's still watching everybody else live their life on TV vicariously instead of going out and doing something for a damn change, start acting on that. I mean, go watch the movie Up, from Pixar, for God's sake, if you need a real kick in the ass.
Dude, yes.
If you haven't seen that movie, it's kind of false truth that Pixar movies, because they're animated, are for kids. And Up is like an 11-year-old movie now, but basically the first 80 years of this guy's life is the first 12 minutes of the movie. And then, he finally gets a sense of adventure and does that thing he's always been meaning to do for the whole rest of the movie. And it's a kick in the ass. I mean, it's a tearjerker too, especially if you're a person who believes in true love, like we talked about recently on this show. But what would you say, kind of in closing here, I think this would be a good place to end it. What would you say to those guys, Benjamin, who go, I'd love to be someone different. I'd love to change my personality. I'd love to have a new purpose, but where do I go to research the options? Where's the candy store that I can go shopping in here?
I mean, we are limited by what we're exposed to. You can't actually proactively set a goal you're not aware of. And so that would require you to start learning, go out and experience new things. Usually what the research shows is that as people age, they become less open to new experiences. They become less open to reading things that conflict with their current worldview, less open to being around new people. So yeah, you would definitely need to not only start researching in the form of like Google, but you'd probably want to start seeing the world. I mean, you've mentioned already that you've done a lot of travel, like it was going out on that church mission for me that like actually exposed me to so many things I was unaware of. I also not only got to be exposed to a lot of terrible things I was unaware of, I also got to be exposed to a lot of amazing things that I was unaware of, like people living really good lives. So yeah, I mean, what's cool about the internet, it's like the double-edged sword of the internet is that you can become more quickly aware of enormous amounts of options. People working from home, just as an example, or traveling the world. I mean, you get to study whatever you want on here. And so you have to like let your curiosity go. And you also have to be willing to expose yourself to new things and get yourself out into new environments. When people are growing up, they have a lot of first-time experiences. First time like going to a movie, first time driving a car, first time kissing, like having a kiss. Like it would be really introspective to ask yourself, like, when was the last time I had a big first? Or has my life been kind of on autopilot lately? When was the last time I have tried something new? And if it's been a while, then you probably need to start going out and seeing more things.
Yeah, we get stuck in that rut. We get set in our ways. I'm so glad you brought up world travel, because a lot of people think that's, something you do after all the other bills are paid, and it's sort of frivolous, and it's something that's in last place in terms of the priority where I'm spending my money. Well, I think world travel is an investment in self-betterment and self-help and becoming the person you would like to be. And it will challenge you to be a person who's perhaps different than you expected you want to be, which is all the more cool. And I'll tell you what, the key word that comes to mind here is curiosity. If you just don't care and you think life is just, something that you sort of slog through until the end, life sucks and then you die kind of mindset, boy, are you missing out. And I think that whole topic of curiosity would be a fantastic topic for a future show. So I think I'm going to make that happen. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is his name, and his book is called Personality Isn't Permanent. And as you've already figured out, gentlemen, there is a lot to talk about, and this is a fascinating, fun book that's going to cause your brain to do mental gymnastics in all the best ways possible. You can find it on Amazon by going to mountaintoppodcast.com/Hardy, Hardy, and I have also put it on top of the queue at my Amazon influencer page, which is mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, thank you so much for a fun conversation.
Dude, you're awesome. It was a lot of fun.
Back at you, my man. And guys, if you haven't been to mountaintoppodcast.com, I invite you to sign up at the top right-hand corner using the red button at the top right-hand corner of the page for 25 minutes with me free. I'm exactly who you think I'm going to be. Let's talk about where you are right now and what you want your future to look like. You don't have to be beholden to what people told you should do, who you should be. A lot of that, once you get it sorted out, will help you get better women in your life, have a better career, do more of the things you want to do, and make the world a better place even as you do that. So go to mountaintoppodcast.com and sign up to talk to me for free. And if you haven't been to the website to check out what my friends at Origin in Maine are doing, they are back in the saddle making jeans and boots for you guys. Man, these are the coolest jeans, the coolest boots you've ever seen. Jocko Willink is the brains behind this operation. Everything is made in the good old US of A, high quality. What else would you expect from Jocko? So go to mountaintoppodcast.com/origin. Use Mountain10 to get 10% off. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.